And hello, my fabulous students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I'm excited to be with you today. It's here. We're at Revolution. We've covered all the things that kind of led up to it, the founding of the colonies, and all the different colonies and their motives for becoming a colony, and the 7 Years' War, and all the coercive act. Everything is leading up to this now. So let us begin. All right, so we got the First Continental Congress. They're going to meet because of the Intolerable Acts. They're like, hey, this isn't cool. What are we going to do about it? So then they all decide, and all the delegates, got together. They were missing delegates from Georgia, but pretty much every other colony was like, yeah, we need to do something about this. So you have them coming together saying, okay, these intolerable acts are too much here. What are we going to do about it? Many of them basically were for independence. Um, and they may have been considered extreme at that point. I'm not sure, but what it means is that you have people like Patrick Henry of Virginia, Samuel Adams, John Adams. They're kind of saying, I think our only option here is independence. We're not. Every time they pass new acts on us and we rebel, they keep tightening the strings on us and the screws, and we can't do anything. Now you have moderates like George Washington in Virginia and John Dickinson in Pennsylvania. And you also have those who are like, you know what? Yeah, we could protest, but let's see if we can't get in the good graces of King George III still. So um, obviously they didn't have loyalists at this because this was more of a patriot thing. Loyalists are people who are loyal to the crown, so it wouldn't make sense to have them there. Um, Actions of Congress. So we have Joseph Galloway. He's going to propose a plan similar to the Albany plan. He's going to say, okay, let's reorder relationships with Parliament. Let's try to smooth things over. Things aren't that bad. We can still get in the good graces of Great Britain, basically. It's going to fail by just one vote, and they're going to instead adopt the Suffolk Resolves. And the Sulfic Resolves are going to do a couple things. Basically, they're just going to tell the king that repeal the intolerable acts. We don't like it, and we're going to keep boycotting if you don't. It's going to pass the Declaration Resolves, and what that means is they're petitioning the king to redress all their colonial grievances, restore colonial rights. Remember, they enjoyed salutary neglect for a very long time, which gave them a lot of autonomy. Now that's kind of being stripped away from them. And you have economic sanctions, and basically they're saying, stop all this. You're hurting us economically. We can't thrive. If it hurts us, it's hurting you, obviously. And anyway, so here we have them petitioning to the king, and as they're petitioning to the king, there's a lot of anger going on in the colonies with all these different acts, especially the coercive acts, right? Um, and then you're going to have rebellions happening. So the first major rebellion that happens is the Lexington Concord conflict. Here you have a General Thomas Gage, and he's going to be trying to basically seize military supplies in the town of Concord. So you have a British general seizing colonial supplies to kind of make it so they can't fight back. And then that's going to lead to the famous ride of Paul Revere and William Dawes. And they're going to warn people, hey, the British are coming to basically um, take away our ability to fight back. And there's going to be a standoff, and there's going to be a shot heard around the world where somebody shot either the British or the colonials. We don't know, but it's known as a shot heard around the world because it forever changes the world. Um, because that's ultimately what leads into revolution at this point. And then you got many things going on. The Americans are heavily outmatched right now, guys. You have to understand these are a ragtag group of people who uh, who love their country, who love their where they live and their families, and they love freedom. Other than that, though, they're not a professional army. The people who have the most professionalism in the army are the ones who fought for the British in the 7 Years' War. So this is what they're dealing with here. Um, so anyway, so we have Bunker Hill, and Bunker Hill kind of becomes a sort of like a testing, a thermometer, if you will, to see just how well can the colonials, these militiamen, these Minutemen, however you want to call them, how can they hold up to the British force and well trained troops? And so Bunker Hill becomes kind of that testing, the thermometer, okay? And although the colonials will have to retreat, the British suffered over 1,000 casualties and heavy losses, which made the Americans feel like, hey, you know what? Maybe we can stand our own here. So then you have the Second Continental Congress coming together, and they're kind of going, okay, last time we met, things were a little quieter. Now they're not because you have the Concord Lexington thing happening. And so they're going to now decide, okay, so what's our next steps, right? And what they decide is they're going to adopt the Declaration of Causes and Necessities for Taking Up Arms. So this is where they appoint George Washington to be the commander in chief of the new colonial army and sent him to Boston to lead the Massachusetts militia and volunteer units from other colonies. So they're setting up George Washington as the general of the official army of the colonies. They authorized Benedict Arnold to raid Quebec in order to draw Canada away from the British Empire. And so they're trying to weaken the British Empire here. And then an American Navy and Marine Corps were organized in the fall of 1775 for the purpose of attacking British ships. So as you can see, the Congress, the Continental Congress, is pretty much determined, okay, we are officially at war here. So despite this idea of being at war and starting to defend themselves, in July 1775, their delegates voted to send an olive branch petition, which basically was telling them that, hey, we're loyal to you and to Parliament. We ask that you just, honor and protect our rights as colonists and Englishmen of those colonies. So King George is going to angrily dismiss the Congress's plea and agree and get Parliament to pass the Prohibitory Act. And at that point, I mean, things are kind of off the rails here. All we need is an official declaration, which, oh, here we go. So, who'd have thought, right? So at this point, it's over. Congress decides, all right, it's time to officially separate from Great Britain. Okay? So Richard Henry Lee of Virginia introduces a resolution of declaring the colonies to be independent. 5 delegates, including Thomas Jefferson, formed a committee to write a statement in support of Lee's resolution. So in this declaration, you have drafted by Jefferson listed specific grievances against King George III's government and outlined principles that justified the revolution. Here's the most famous line, pretty much. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So they are basically saying that King George has violated these rights and that they have now decided that they will pull away and declare independence, which they officially do on July 4th, 1776. So here we have competing sides. This is what the British have going for them, right? They got 3 times population. They got wealthy economy. They could finance a war. They have large and well-trained armies and the most powerful navy in the world, arguably, especially after the defeat of the Spanish Armada in the 1600s. And then you have the patriots, and their largest number of armies were from New England and Virginia. Most soldiers didn't want to travel outside the region. They would serve in local militia units for short periods. Then they'd leave, go home, work on their farm, get their farms ready, harvest if they had to, depending on what year it is, or plant seeds, and then they would go off back to duty. So these aren't even professional soldiers. You understand? Like these are farmers who are trying to still farm and then fight for their independence. So as a result, you got Washington. He's never going to have more than 20,000 troops under his command at one time. It's amazing what Washington had to put up with and what he was able to work with as a result of all the disadvantages that the Patriots had compared to this elite, arguably the strongest empire in the entire world at this time, right? So we have soldiers who are chronically ill equipped, they're rarely paid, and they're always short on supplies. So what they had though was a strong commitment for independence and a resilience against enduring hardships. So you have Tories, okay? So you got British troops, you got patriots, right? And then you have what's called Tories or loyalists. So Tories is just I mean the Tory party was the party in power in parliament during this time. They were in favor of the war. Anyway, people in the colonies who were colonials, but they supported the crown or they supported Parliament, they were called Tories as a derogatory mark, if you will, remark. They were loyalists, they were Tories, and even Ben Franklin's son is a Tory and is the last royal governor of New Jersey. So even great patriot, this is splitting families apart. I need you to understand this. Friends, families, and this is a divide that can't really go back. You're either with the king or you're not, and everyone's an enemy if you're not. And the patriots are probably having the same attitude, where you're our enemy if you're not for independence, right? So towards the end of the war, we already know who wins. You're going to see about 80,000 Tories who are just going to immigrate to Canada or to Britain or just, I mean, they're going to leave because they're going to get persecuted, made fun of, or whatever by the victorious patriots. So we have additional groups as well, right? So we have the American Indians. They're going to join the war with the British, but they're also going to lose, and that's not going to go well in their favor in the minds of the colonials, right? And then you have the African slaves, and we have African slaves who will fight on both sides, actually. So you have about 5,000 African Americans who fought as patriots. Um, you have Britain who comes out first and says any African slave who fights for Britain and we win, they will be free. And then you have the colonists who offer the same thing. Um, and so you have African slaves who are fighting for hopes of their freedom, and I'm sure some of them like the idea of independence. Um, and then you also have um, people like Peter Salem who are going to be recognized for the bravery as a soldier and a person who's willing to fight for their country. So you have the initial American losses and hardship. I need you to understand that the Revolutionary War did not go well for the colonists for like the first 3 years. Washington really did not have what he needed to have a successful army. So many times he just retreated strategically, um, which allowed him to fight another day. He almost came into complete disaster at the Battle of New York, where he almost got completely squashed, um, and that would have been the end of the resistance, likely. Okay. However, that didn't happen. He was able to successfully retreat. It's a shame because in your textbook, it's not really going into great detail here about all the different battles. But you really do want to learn about more of the ins and outs here. I mean, Washington is considered the indispensable man of the American Revolution, and there's a reason for that. And and he's not really getting a whole lot of detailed in his part of this in the textbook, unfortunately. anyway, so Washington, one of the lowest points of Washington and the whole patriot independence movement was at Valley Forge in in Pennsylvania, and that is it was a bitter cold winter. Many many soldiers died just from frostbite and hypothermia. It was rough, and they were also defeated. I mean, they had to retreat. They got their butts kicked at the Battle of New York, and so Valley Forge is considered the lowest point for morale for the Patriots. And of course, the British, continued to hurt the economy in the colonies by occupying their ports, by making sure that no one can get in or out that they didn't want to get in or out. And so that's going to cause their economy to decline by 95%. So, and then you have Congress printing paper money and it's nearly worthless. There's no logical reason why, at this point, anyone would think that the Patriots could win. However, things are going to change now. We're going to have a very significant battle that Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold are going to attack the British in New England, and that's going in New York, and that's going to be a turning point, especially for Benedict Arnold, who's going to be just he's going to be known for just such bravery and ferocity. Um, and he's not going to feel like he's getting the accolades that he should, and he's probably correct. Anyway, they were victorious at the Battle of Saratoga, and they persuaded France to join the war against Britain. So Ben Franklin's been over in France for I think a couple of years by now, and he's trying to use his he's a charming, charismatic individual. So he's trying to use that to kind of get in the good graces of the French. The French kind of honor him, one, because he's just a man of science and he's, had so many inventions and that are just so well renowned throughout Western Europe. And he's also, against the British, which the French like that as well, because the British and the French aren't friends right now. So Ben Franklin's over there, but once the Battle of Saratoga was a success, and it could show that Washington and his troops can stand up against Britain, that changes things. And the French say, "All right, we'll join in here." And the French are going to provide money, troops, armament, military leadership, naval support that are going to tip the balance of the military power in favor of the United States and pave the way to the Continental Army's ultimate victory. If it weren't for France, um, there would not have been victory. I would venture to say. And also keep in mind that when France gets involved in the war, now Britain is at war with France, which now Britain can't really they can't concentrate all their power and energy in the colonies because now France is attacking them in their colonies as well, and French ships are now attacking British ships as they're leaving to the colonies. And anyway, so it does cause the Britain to have to sort of widen their focus for the war. So then victory comes, and victory is going to come as we have more victories happening, especially along the Ohio territory in the river area. Um, Things are going to solidify in the north, and then things are going to come to a head in the south, and that's going to be down in Virginia at a place called Yorktown. And that is where Washington is finally going to pin General Cornwallis up against the ocean, right? And Cornwallis was hoping to kind of get some ships that could swing around to the bay and pick them up, but you got French ships and you have a storm that happened as well that just made it impossible. So they were able to get Cornwallis to concede, and it was over. And it was an amazing victory for the Patriots, one that people even at 2-3 years ago would said that would never have happened. So you have the Treaty of Paris that gets signed after the victory of Washington over Cornwallis. So the war had become unpopular in Britain, by the way. So understand, when you just got war and it doesn't even look like you're winning, okay, the mother country or the parent country is going to be like, yeah, the people don't really approve of this. So Lord North, he's going to kind of have to resign along with the Tories, and the Tories are no longer going to be in power, but the Whig leaders will be in power. The Whigs weren't for the war. So you also have a political shift happening that's in Great Britain as well. But the Treaty of Paris had a few things. One, they said, okay, Britain would have to recognize the existence of the United States as an independent nation. Two, the Mississippi River would be the western boundary of that nation. Americans would have fishing rights off the coast of Canada, and Americans would pay debts owed to British merchants and honor loyalist claims for property confiscation during the war. And so the Treaty of Paris was signed, and I just want to go over a few things about the status of African Americans, which I touched the light upon earlier, but I need you to understand that for a time, all these steps that were being taken, it was so the spirit of the revolution is that all men were created equal, right? That's kind of what Jefferson, that's what he said in the Declaration of Independence. So that spirit of a revolution, it was still kind of very strong in the hearts of the people, where they're like, you know what? Maybe we should give freedom to these African slaves. So the Continental Congress abolished the importation of enslaved people, and most states even went along with the prohibition of it. Several northern states abolished slavery, while in the South, some owners voluntarily freed their enslaved laborers. Okay, what really changes in all this is the invention of the cotton gin in 1793. And what that did is that made cotton production far more efficient, and it increased the demand for low cost labor. So now we can just pump out cotton like it's nothing else with the cotton gin, but we need more laborers. And so that kind of refueled the whole we need African slaves to do this. And by 1830s, southern states developed a rationale for slavery that found religious and political justification for continuing to hold human beings in lifelong bondage. And also during the revolution, you got what the women did. The women don't get enough credit, and they ought to, because they were the ones that sort of kept the economy going while the men were away fighting. You got the Daughters of Liberty, who were organizing boycotts before and after the war. I'm sorry, before and during the war. During the war, you have them providing supplies to the fighting forces. You have them coming and living in the camps with the men. They're living as cooks, as nurses. They're helping in battles. You have people even replacing their husbands. If their husband falls in battle, they're going to take their place. There you got Mary McCauley, who's going to do that. You also have people like Deborah Sampson, who are going to pull a Mulan, and they're going to just pretend that they're a dude and they're a guy and they're going to fight. You have female loyalists who will also provide support to the colonials and the British troops. So women definitely had their part in here. Think the most important contribution, though, is that they just kept the economy going. Women ran farms and businesses while their husbands were away, and their sons were fighting. They provided most of the food and clothing and necessities for the war effort. I mean, look at this picture. I mean, this is not an exaggeration. You have the Daughters of Liberty and other women who are constantly trying to figure out, how can I do my part to support in this effort, and they need to get that credit where credit is due. So, okay, go ahead and write that 1 page summary, and we'll actually that 1.5 page summary. Oh, just write the summary, and we'll talk about it when we come back.